Morning everyone, here's the next video of the next poem, Please Hold. I'm actually going to read the poem today, which I don't usually do, but this poem is quite a good one and it's quite funny, and so I think sometimes it helps to hear it. I'm assuming that with all the other poems you have read it before you've watched the video. If you haven't, please do make sure you do that going forward. So 132 if you're joining in with your copy at home. Please hold. This is the future, my wife says. We're already there, and it's the same as the present. Your future, here, she says. And I'm talking to a robot on the phone. The robot is giving me countless options, none of which answer to my needs. Wonderful, says the robot, when I've given him my telephone number. And great, says the robot, when I've given my account number. I have a wonderful telephone number and a great account number, but I can't find nothing to meet my needs on the telephone, and into my account, which is really the robot's account, goes money, my money, to pay for nothing. I'm paying a robot for doing nothing. The call is free of charge, says the robot. Yes, but I'm paying for it, I shout, out of my wonderful account into my great telephone bill. Wonderful, says the robot. And my wife says, this is the future. I'm sorry, I don't understand, says the robot. Please say yes or no. Or you can say repeat or menu. You can say yes, no, repeat or menu. Or you can say agent if you'd like to talk to someone real who is just as robotic. I scream, agent! And I'm cut off. My wife says, this is the future. We are already there, and it's the same as the present. Your future, here, she says. And I'm talking to the robot on the phone, and he's giving me no options in the guise of countless alternatives. We appreciate your patience. Please hold. Ein klein Nachtmusik. Please hold. Ein klein Nachtmusik. Please hold. Ein fucking klein Nachtmusik. And the robot transfers me to himself. Your call is important to us, he says. And my translator says, this means your call is not important to them. My wife says, this is the future. And my translator says, please hold means that for all your accomplishments, the only way you can now meet your needs is by looting. Wonderful, says the robot. Please hold. Please grow old. Please grow cold. Please do what you're told. Grow old, grow cold. This is the future. Please hold. Okay, so I think a really good poem, really effective poem, humorous, satirical, but sadly, as with lots of poems, a sort of more darker, sinister, bleak message as well for this poem. All right, let's talk about the title, Please Hold. So obviously, first of all, it hints at the subject matter of the poem. This is going to be the narrator on the telephone to an automated robot, and at one stage they are put on hold, as we just heard in the poem. Yeah, that's it really, that's the title of the poem. Okay, things to say about the poem, as I've said already, it's a humorous poem. It is what we call satirical, or it is a satire, which means to criticise, but to criticise using humour, to try to show the flaws in something. So the idea here is that the poet is perhaps criticising our modern world and perhaps what the future holds with our kind of reliance on technology and the over-dominance perhaps of technology. And maybe a kind of suggestion that that is taking away from people feeling really connected to one another. And that is taking away from kind of human feeling and human emotion and human experience. Everything is becoming this kind of automated response. When we looked at the poem from the Journal of a Disappointed Man last week, I mentioned Karl Marx and Max Weber, socialists, really, really known socialists with socialist theory. And I talked about something that was called the alienation of labour, not neighbour, where in the Industrial Revolution, when manual jobs were becoming taken over by machines, the men started to feel alienated, as if they didn't belong, they couldn't connect, there was no purpose or value in the work that they were doing, they didn't feel part of it. And you can sort of take that reading of this poem as well. You know, there are people perhaps today, and it's, think about Marxism and the Industrial Revolution was when we had romantic poetry, those big six romantic poets, Keats, Coleridge, Byron, Shelley, Wordsworth, all of those. And they were kind of anti that idea that people were becoming so obsessed with industry, with science, and forgetting what's really, really important in life. And there's those sorts of tones perhaps can be seen in this poem as well. Okay, and the poet kind of criticizing said our perhaps over-reliance on technology, the dominance of technology, and how it is preventing genuine, authentic human connection, and demonstrating it just through this phone call. The title, I'm sure many readers, probably yourselves as well, will be familiar with. You know, sadly, probably most of us have been put on hold or have had the experience of talking to automated responses and finding it very, very difficult to find the information you want or do the thing you kind of phoned up to do in the first place, with all this kind of, you know, say yes after the tone, type this in, type that in. And so really that's what this poem is about, that moment, that conversation, but also a bigger idea about our reliance on technology in society. Okay, now more newness. I don't often talk about the structure of the poems at the start. Sometimes as I'm going through the poem, I draw your attention to structural aspects like caesura or enjambment or end stops or shifts in tone. And as I said, I was asked by a student to mention form and structure more. I'm not doing it because of that though, just because actually I think there's something interesting to say about the structure of this poem, and sometimes there isn't always. But it's really, really clear with this poem. You know, it's a long, mostly one stanza poem. There are two stanzas, but most of it is this one long stanza and then a very short 3 lines at the end. And that, you know, just seems really, really deliberate choice by the poet to try and mirror the duration of that phone call, perhaps that long, draining, frustrating, monotonous experience. So that's probably quite an obvious point to make. You know, as we read the poem, and as I've broken it down, obviously for the purpose of the PowerPoint, because it makes it easier for you to see and for us to go through. But you can see actually that this poem could have been quite easily divided into different stanzas. There are natural pauses in the poem, and because actually there's not much enjambment, you can definitely find, you know, clear ends which could be stanzas. So it's a very, very conscious choice by the poet to make most of it all one long stanza to mirror that phone call, and then probably more widely to mirror that kind of monotony and repetition, because there is a lot of repetition in the poem, so that furthers this idea of the modern world being repetitive, being monotonous, and perhaps that being what is ahead of us in the future. And I suppose what we can say kind of in a by proxy way, because this poem seems to be very much about the current world and future world causing a lack of fulfillment and creating frustration and a sense of feeling dissatisfied, you could infer then that the poet is wanting us to get back to a time when, you know, we talked more, or we interacted with human beings more, where things were more genuine, authentic, emotional, and like I said just a moment ago, so very in keeping perhaps actually with romantic poetry of the past. So you could, I don't know, you could suggest that this is a modern romantic poet. And in that way, I suppose there are lots of links to lots of the other poems, where lots of these poems actually seem to be quite nostalgic, looking back at the time that's gone before, as if that was a wonderful time. So that for me, when I've looked at these poems, seems to be a really, really central theme. Okay. On to annotating the poem itself. This is the future, my wife says. And again, like many of the other poems have started, this starts with a very definite phrase. This is the future. So that use of is makes it sound very certain, very confident. You know, this is what the wife in this poem and probably what the poet is maybe suggesting, this is the future that lies ahead, or particularly this is the future that lies ahead if we don't make any changes, if we don't do anything. So this is the future, my wife says. And also because we've got the my wife says, in terms of the form of the poem, this takes the form of a conversation, a moment in time when the narrator was making this phone call and was being put on hold. So like other poems as well, we get a conversational tone. So lots and lots of links to other poems. You can think, what other poems are their conversational tones? What other poems have we got strong, definite, opening line, or certainly certain confident language in the poem? This is the future, my wife says. And also what you might have already recognised is when I read the poem, this line reappears several times. And obviously that's probably emphasising then that this is where we're going, this is what the future, this is the future that lies ahead of us if we don't make changes. And like I said just a moment ago, probably even where these lines, where this line is repeated, could symbolise where it could actually be an end of a stanza or a start of a stanza. But we'll look at that a little bit more as we go through. So this is the future, my wife says. We are already there. So again, continue that idea. We are already in the future. The future is not going to be dissimilar to the situation we're in right now. And it's the same as the present. And then that is really further emphasised with the enjambement, same as the present, because we know the effect of the enjambment is kind of to draw our attention to the words or the phrases that often land on the line below, and the essential idea. So here the poet is saying the future will be much like it is right now. And I guess then going back to the title, it's, please don't hold out for a better future. Please don't wait for tomorrow thinking it's going to be better than today, because maybe sadly it's not. Your future here, she says. So like we had in the last poem we looked at with the gun, we've got that your again, and that your, you pronoun sort of serving two purposes. Your future, first of all, it's the wife talking to her husband in the poem, but it's also talking to us, the readers, our future, which perhaps makes us feel more involved in this poem, makes us consider our futures and what lies ahead and what our attitudes are to technology, to that sort of reliance and dominance of it in society. And I'm talking to a robot on the phone. And then the comedy is there right from the outset, because we've got the sort of the end stop here, and then this unbroken line, which is kind of summing up then what they're saying the present is and what the future is, and I'm talking to a robot on the phone. So that sort of sarcastic tone, that satirical tone, criticising that idea perhaps that is that all the future is, talking to robots on the phone? Is that all life is? Is there not more to it? So that kind of dark humour, that wry comedic tone of this poem. I'm talking to a robot on the phone. That's what it is. Okay, and then obviously it continues with that conversation and what is happening as the speaker or the central character of the poem is talking to the robot and what's happening in that conversation. The robot is giving me countless options, none of which answer to my needs. So humorous, first of all on the surface level, superficially, got this robot saying, you can have this, 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 and then straight away on the next line, but none of it answers what I want. None of it is taking me where I want, give me the answers I need. So first of all, just comic, because again, possibly being in that situation, maybe you want to make a bank payment and it says, press 1 for savings, press 2 for something, and none of them are the option you want. So you've got that identifiable element. Many of the readers reading the poem and thinking, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about here. I've had that experience before. It's so frustrating, and therefore just finding it quite funny. But because this is a satire, there is a more serious message behind that comedy. And we get here the tension between the countless option and none of which answer my needs. It seems to me like the poet is kind of exploring the idea of an illusion of possibility, how sometimes in society, we're made to feel like we've got all these options, all these endless opportunities, but perhaps it's a false reality, and that isn't actually the case. And there are limitations and restrictions, and or even all these wonderful things. They don't make us feel fulfilled. They don't answer my needs. That my needs is repeated here, so you can see the importance in the poem that the writer is drawing our attention to the things that we need, and the hierarchy of needs would say that we need food, shelter, warmth, love. These are the things that we need in life, and none of those things is being provided on this telephone call. Okay, and then again that comedic and satirical tone continues. Wonderful, says the robot. It isn't wonderful, and the experience of being on that phone and having this one-sided conversation isn't wonderful at all. So that humour, and again possibly what readers can identify with, this very artificial praise that you might get on such a telephone call. Wonderful, great. It's not wonderful and it's not great, but someone thought it would sound good. Wonderful, says the robot when I give him my telephone number. And great, says the robot, when I give him my account number. I have a wonderful telephone number and a great account number. So obviously just hopefully you get humour, really, really funny here. It's absurd to think that you have a wonderful telephone number or a great account number. Those adjectives are just completely out of place here. And I suppose it's highlighting how robots don't appreciate the nuances of human emotion, and it's just this automated response to say these words, but actually there's no truth behind the words. But I can find nothing to meet my needs. So I already talked about the repetition of my needs, but here perhaps is interesting to comment on the nothing. I can find nothing to meet my needs. Now, first of all, it's grammatically incorrect. It should be I can't find anything to meet my needs, but the double negative, I suppose, draws our attention to this word nothing, which again is repeated here, and it's repeated lots of times throughout the poem as well. So it seems to be quite a deliberate choice from the poet to emphasize how they're saying there is nothing of value in the world anymore. It's the whole nothingness behind this reliance on technology. So nothing to meet my needs. On the telephone and into my account, which is really the robot's account, goes money, my money, to pay for nothing. So that repetition of nothing, the idea that there's no real value or purpose in this exchange. You've got the parenthesis here drawing our attention to this line, which is really the robot's account, which I suppose is a reflection of our modern world, that we very rarely possess anything physical anymore. It's all done, electronically and through computers and through technology. You don't actually, if you've got £5,000 in savings, you don't have that physically in your possession. It exists virtually online in some, technological cyberspace type thing. So yeah, remember, there's more detailed notes. Please do go and look at the PowerPoint in full. Sometimes I've probably written it better than I'm able to explain in these videos, so they will be all uploaded to the portal as well. So please do take a look. I'm paying a robot for doing nothing. Again, that comedic tone, that satirical tone, that very blunt, direct statement. I'm paying a robot for doing nothing. It seems absurd, perhaps, that we have all this technology and a question about what purpose it serves, really. This call is free of charge, says the mind-reading robot. So again, humour. This is kind of the thought that the speaker has had. I'm paying a robot for doing nothing. And then almost as if the robot has been able to hear his mind, this call is free of charge, says the mind-reading robot. So deliberate humour here, because and sort of irony, because of course the robot absolutely can't be a mind reader. Humans can't be mind readers, and robots absolutely can't be mind readers. Yes, but I'm paying for it, we shout. I suppose there's a dual meanings you can take from I'm paying for it, a really, really deep level. Is the speaker saying that I'm paying for this in the way that it's kind of affecting my soul? I'm paying for this not in a monetary sense, but actually this experience is causing me frustration and anger, and therefore I am paying for it in a kind of emotional way, possibly. I'm paying for it, I shout. So you can feel the anger and the frustration of the speaker, and again, it might be familiar to some readers. Out of my wonderful account into my great telephone bill. So again, repeating the words of the robot previously. So that kind of now further repetition kind of creates hyperbole here, this kind of dramatic, exaggerated effect, but it's very comedic, and we're continually reminded that absurd idea of having a wonderful account, a great telephone bill. Wonderful, says the robot. We get this phrase repeated throughout as well, that the only response the robot has got is wonderful. And so clearly the robot doesn't understand the feelings of the narrator, the feelings of the speaker, because they're a robot and they don't have feelings. They don't have independent thought. So again, that idea is being stressed and interwoven throughout the poem. And my wife says, this is the future. So that refrain becomes maybe quite chilling, quite dark. Some people have said, this is the future. It takes on a really kind of quite bleak tone, bleak idea. This is what life has become about, talking to robots who can't understand how we're feeling. And then, again, said possibly this is a moment where it could have been a new stanza. It seems to be kind of a slight shift, a slight moving on in the phase of the poem. After that first line had just been repeated before it. So you can kind of maybe work out where there could have been new stanzas started. I'm sorry, I don't understand, says the robot. Again, lots of different meanings here. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Of course the robot doesn't understand. I just said the robot doesn't have feelings, doesn't have thoughts, doesn't have independent thought. They can't possibly understand. So there is a clear comedic reference there. Maybe though it's a kind of reflection of how the speaker is feeling, or how the poet feels about the world. I don't understand. I don't understand why we are living the way that we are living, why we have this over-reliance on technology, this dominance of technology. Perhaps it is actually a reflection of the poet. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Please say yes or no, or you can say repeat or menu. You can say yes, no, repeat or menu, or you can say agent. So you get the familiarity that you might have had if you've had one of these phone calls. In the analysis that you can read in the portal, there's something about how things are being reduced down even further, how the world is becoming more and more simplified. Perhaps you can say yes and you can say no. Choices, individuality being restricted, and that sort of thing. But I'll let you look at that more in your own time. Or you can say agent if you'd like to talk to someone real who is just as robotic. Again, here the kind of darker satirical nature of the poem can be seen. The idea that even if you spoke to a human being on this phone call, they would still be just as robotic. So the idea that perhaps we have become less effective communicators, we've become more robotic, we become more programmed, or even the human being actually has got a script to follow and isn't going to use their individual thought either. So quite a depressing and frustrating idea. I scream agent. It's probably then at that point why we see the frustration of the speaker. I scream agent, and the exclamation as well to emphasize that frustration. Again, perhaps familiarity for some readers who may have done something similar when on the phone to one of these automated robots. And I'm cut off. And my wife says, this is the future. So again, that refrain coming in, that repetition of ideas, that sort of bleak reminder, and maybe creates a moment of reflection or introspection from our behalf. So yeah, actually, this is pretty rubbish. And then not just that one line that's repeated, but actually a further 3 lines are repeated from the start of the poem, which creates that cyclical effect, as if this is something which is happening over and over and over and over and over again, which again mirrors the idea of the world that we live in and the future being repetitive, being mundane, being monotonous. So you're already there, and it's the same as the present. Your future here, she says, and I'm talking to a robot on the phone. So we've had all of those lines earlier on in the poem. The only difference is where we had an end stop previously, we've now got a comma and a continuation. And he is giving me no options in the guise of countless alternatives. So exactly the same idea that we had earlier, where it was kind of countless options but nothing to fulfill my needs. We've now got no options in the disguise, okay, in the guise of countless alternatives. So returns to this idea of this illusion of choice. The modern world and maybe the future will pretend there is lots of opportunity, there is lots of choice, but actually there's no feeling of no option. So the feeling of dissatisfaction, feeling of not being fulfilled comes about in this poem again. And as I said before, going back to the idea that perhaps it's about the poet's message, the poet longing for a meaningful world, a world of authentic, genuine interactions between human beings and not kind of false illusions or false realities. Again, perhaps a shift, could be a new stanza. We appreciate your patience. Please hold. Einklein Nacht Musik. Please hold. Einklein Nacht Musik. Please hold. Ein klein Nacht Musik. So we get the repetition of the title. Please hold. And effectively done here to help us to really probably remember a situation like this where you're told, you're in a queue, your call is important to us, please hold, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. And often as well, sometimes music. And sometimes if you're on the phone for that long, it's music that is then repeated. So the repetition of the Mozart composition here, again suggesting that is music that's been played over and over again, and the expletive here, the frustration of the speaker, but also amusement for us. And again, some of that amusement and that comic effect is because of the familiarity of that situation. And the robot transfers me to himself. So when it goes from kind of robot to robot on these calls, and the frustration that can bring. Your call is important to us, he says, and my translator says, this means your call is not important to them. And my wife says, this is the future, that refrain again. And my translator says, please hold means that for all your accomplishments, the only way you can now meet your needs is by looting. And probably here, moving towards the end of the poem, is where the satire becomes the most stark and the most dark, and starts to become political as well, which satire often is. Perhaps you got the idea here, playing on technology. The human being now is having to work out what the meaning is behind what the robot is saying, something the robot can't do, actually. Maybe there's an irony there. And maybe reflecting what lots of us think when we are on those calls and they say your call is important to us. Perhaps you've said yourself, yeah, clearly we're not that important. But here is where it becomes, I think, political. I think more serious, that darker tone, the satire comes through. The only way you can now meet your needs, and again, definite language, certain, the only way you can now, in the present, meet your needs is by looting. And I think, and again, remember, all of these videos are just my personal interpretation of the poem, but you may remember In 2011, we had what's been called the London riots. Started off with riots in London, but then spread also to other cities throughout the country, where some people were just, vandalizing, looting, raiding, destroying, going into shops, taking whatever they wanted. And it was quite a serious event for a number of days, and rumbles for a few weeks in the UK, as well as also has happened in other places, in other countries around the world. And it's kind of commonly accepted or thought, or some people believe, that the reason why, or one of the reasons that's put forward as to why they thought that looting happened, is because the people who were doing that looting, often youths, often people who are unemployed, was because they felt, going back to that Marxist and Weber term, alienated by society, that they'd lost connection with society. And that can be for lots of reasons, and it could be more to do with kind of how they felt the government was treating them and how things weren't getting better and all that sort of stuff. But also, I suppose, technology can make us feel alienated. It can distance people. Obviously, the opposite is true as well, but this poem is focusing on the idea of losing authentic human connection and the alienation that can bring. And if you feel alienated, then you don't care about things anymore. If you don't feel connected to something, it has less value for you. And that's why perhaps, the looting happened, because they didn't feel any connection. They didn't put the pieces together, going, vandalizing that shop, stealing was going to actually probably affect other people's jobs, livelihood, all those sorts of things, because people felt isolated. They didn't feel part of a bigger community. So maybe there's an allusion there to those events of 2011. So the only way you can now meet your needs is by looting. Perhaps as well, the only way you can feel alive, the only way you can feel real emotion, the only way you can feel anything is to loot, to do something criminal and wild and free, going against this kind of regimented, restricted, automated, computerized society that this poem is kind of conveying. Which, again, going back to the structural point, perhaps the short lines, and how it looks physically on the page, all lines are kind of quite similar length, do help to convey that idea of kind of a regimented, restricted, never changing, not distinct, not unique, not original society. Everything becoming a lot more uniform, a lot more sane. So then we've got the full stop, and directly after that very potentially emotive statement, the idea of meeting your needs through looting. Wonderful, says the robot. So absolutely no understanding from the robot. Said, of course, they don't have empathy, don't have human thought, independent thought, and the fact that it divides the line, the looting, the human act, and the robot, shows how those two worlds can never understand each other. The robots can never understand the human emotion perhaps can never understand the robots. So the world of technology and the world of human feeling cannot be matched. And then separate final stanza, 3 lines. Please hold, please grow old, please grow cold, please do what you're told, grow old, grow cold, this is the future, please hold. So obviously we've got a lot of repetition and rhyme, and that it's monosyllabic words as well. So really to mirror, really to echo the idea that this modern society, this modern world, which relies on technology, is becoming much more simple, much more, which is ironic, isn't it? Much more simple, much more limited, monotonous, boring, repetitive. Grow cold, lacks feeling, lacks human emotion. This is the future. Please hold. So please hold, obviously the title of the poem, and maybe a kind of real bleak ending here. Please hold, please wait for this future. You know, the idea of holding is in anticipation of something to come, but it's already told us that this is the future. This is what you're waiting for, and therefore don't think too much or want too much or have too high expectations of what is to come, because this is what it will be. So yeah, potentially then that satire becomes quite serious and quite bleak, but a brilliant poem, very funny, very satirical, very comic, very well written. And I didn't want to leave you on doom and gloom, as sometimes these poems do. So it isn't all doom and gloom. You know, just because Driscoll wrote this poem and this was perhaps his view on the world doesn't mean that it's reality. And you know, this was focusing on a particularly frustrating aspect of technology. But particularly as we've seen in this coronavirus outbreak, there are lots of wonderful uses of technology. Maybe even me being able to teach these lessons from my home to you would be a more positive use of technology, and all the much better things than that are happening at the moment. But also the fact that he wrote it, though, and maybe if you read it and you think about it and you don't like the future that he's setting out, you may want to change it, you may want to do something about it. So perhaps it could, in fact, incite social change, and it could be a really kind of positive driver for change. So just to end, though, thinking then, I suppose, about how people actually, in this difficult time, have connected with each other, have showed real human emotion, how technology is being used for good, how people have appreciated the value of things like getting outside or being with their families and not becoming too reliant on technology, using it for its good, and also knowing there's a limit as well, and that other things are very important. So hope you enjoyed that one. See you again soon. Take care. End stream. End stream. Yes, I would like to end the stream.